Hello there, and welcome to History to Fall Asleep. Tonight, we are setting out across an age of wooden ships, shifting winds, ink-stained maps, and horizons that seem to keep moving farther away. We are traveling into what is often called the Age of Discovery. It was a time when European kingdoms sent vessels over oceans in search of trade wealth, influence, and routes to places they only partly understood. It was a time of spices and sea charts, of storms and unfamiliar stars, of small ships crossing distances that looked almost impossible. But it was never only a story about explorers. The oceans were already known and traveled by many peoples. African merchants, Arab and Persian sailors, Indian ocean pilots, Chinese fleets, Polynesian wayfinders, and indigenous communities across the Americas all carried deep knowledge of water, weather, land, and travel. The people, reached by European ships, were not waiting to be discovered. They were living in homelands with their own histories, trade networks, languages, and memories. So tonight we will move slowly through the Age of Discovery with both wonder and care. We will hear about caravels and compasses, the search for spices, the voyages of Columbus, da Gama, and Magellan, and the crowded ports where early globalization began to take shape. We will also remember the harder parts of the story: conquest, disease, forced labor, slavery, environmental change, and resistance. There will be no rush, just one gentle fact after another. If these quiet history journeys help you relax, you are welcome to subscribe to History to Fall Asleep. It helps other late-night listeners find their way here too. But for now, let your shoulders loosen. Let your breath become unhurried. Imagine a dark sea beneath a wide sky, with a single ship moving slowly toward a horizon it cannot yet understand. And as the day becomes more distant, let us begin. Fact 1. The Age of Discovery is a name given long after the voyages. The phrase ecological is a modern label for a period when European states expanded long-distance sea travel, especially from the 15th into the 17th centuries. It sounds simple, but the label can be misleading. It suggests that the world was unknown until European ships arrived. In reality, the world was already full of old routes, skilled navigators trading ports, languages, and civilizations. The phrase is still useful when it describes a particular surge in European oceanic expansion. But it needs to be handled gently and carefully, because every shore these sailors reached or reached belonged to someone's world. Let that image settle for a moment. There is no need to hold every name or date. Just picture the slow movement of a ship across dark water, guided by partial knowledge, and let the details drift onward like a wake fading behind it. Fact 2. The sea had been a highway long before Europe's ocean voyages. Long before Portuguese and Spanish captains sailed outward, merchants and sailors crossed the Indian Ocean, the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, the South China Sea, and the Pacific. Goods moved through these networks in small parcels and great cargoes. So did stories, beliefs, technologies, and languages. Spices from South and Southeast Asia silk from China, gold from Africa, and glass from the Mediterranean could travel astonishing distances. The age of discovery did not create global contact from nothing. It changed the scale, direction, and violence of some of those connections, especially after European states began trying to control the routes. For now, you do not have to solve the whole map. You can simply notice how one small decision, one instrument, or one turn in the wind could change the course of a journey. Then allow the sea to become quiet again. Fact 3. Spices were small objects with very large consequences. Pepper, cloves, nutmeg, cinnamon, and other spices were prized in European markets. They flavored food, scented rooms, appeared in medicines, and carried the prestige of faraway places. Most reached Europe through long chains of traders. A sack of pepper might pass through many hands before it reached a northern European table. European rulers and merchants hoped that a direct sea route would reduce costs and increase profits. The desire for spices was not the only reason for exploration, but it was one of the clearest. A few fragrant seeds could help send ships into seas no crew knew well. It is a gentle reminder that history is rarely a straight line. It moves by detours, pauses, mistakes, and returns. As you listen, let your own thoughts take the easier route, drifting without needing to arrive anywhere at all. Fact 4. Portugal faced outward toward the Atlantic. Portugal's western coast looked across the Atlantic Ocean, while its southern coast opened toward Africa. This position did not guarantee success, but it made seafaring a practical part of life. Fishing, trade, warfare, and coastal travel all developed maritime skills. Portuguese rulers also had reasons to seek new sources of wealth and new political influence. Over time, royal sponsorship, merchant investment, shipbuilding, map-making, and the experience of sailors came together. The result was not one sudden burst of genius. It was a long accumulation of practice, error, and repeated returns to the sea. You may imagine the sound of ropes against wood, and a soft, steady tide under the hull. The past can be complicated, but tonight we can approach it slowly, one calm detail at a time, without rushing toward the next horizon. Fact 5. Prince Henry was important, but not a lone inventor. Prince Henry of Portugal is often called Henry the Navigator. The title makes him sound as though he stood at a helm, pointing ships toward the horizon. In reality, he supported voyages and helped gather resources around Portuguese maritime expansion. But he was not a solitary mastermind who invented navigation. The achievements of the period depended on many people: shipwrights, pilots, African traders, map-makers, interpreters, soldiers, and anonymous sailors. The quieter truth is more interesting. Big historical changes often come from networks of people, rather than from one famous figure standing alone in a portrait. Now, if your mind begins to wander, it can wander safely. These old routes crossed oceans, but you only need to travel as far as the next quiet sentence. Let the rest of the day fall farther behind you with every imagined wave. Fact 6. caravels were built for flexibility, not magic. The caravel became famous because it was comparatively small, quick, and well-suited to coastal exploration. It could be handled by a modest crew and, in some forms, could sail closer to the wind than larger vessels. But it was not a magical ship that made danger disappear. Atlantic weather could still tear sails, break masts, and scatter fleets. Caravels mattered, because they gave captains a useful balance of speed, maneuverability, and carrying capacity. Their importance lay in practical design, not romance. A well-built hull, like a good tool, made a difficult task slightly more possible. A fact like this can feel large when we first meet it. Then, with a little time, it becomes one more light on a distant shore. You do not need to keep it. You can let it glow for a moment and then gently fade. Fact 7. Lateen sails helped sailors work against the wind. Many ships used triangular lateen sails, a design known around the Mediterranean and wider maritime worlds long before Atlantic expansion. These sails could help a vessel tack or zigzag against a headwind. Sailing against the wind was never easy. It required patience, skill, and a willingness to accept a route that looked indirect on a map. Yet, the ability to work with changing winds gave sailors more choices. It turned the sea from a force that simply pushed a ship into something that could, to a degree, be negotiated with through careful handling. The ocean often made people patient because it offered no faster answer. There was only the wind, the waiting, and the next observation. Let that patience belong to you for a little while as your breathing becomes slower and softer. Fact 8. Navigation was a collection of small observations. A navigator did not rely on one perfect instrument. He watched the sun, stars, waves, clouds, watercolor, and the behavior of a compass needle. He estimated speed, recorded direction, and compared expectation with what appeared at dawn. A voyage was held together by repeated small acts of attention. Even a simple observation, such as the direction of a swell, could matter when land was still invisible. This was slow knowledge. It lived in notebooks, charts, memory, and conversation. The open ocean looked empty, but skilled sailors learned to notice that it was always giving quiet information. Perhaps that is enough to remember. Every journey depended on people noticing the world around them. Tonight, you can do the opposite. You can stop noticing the small worries of the day and let them recede into the background. Fact 9. Dead reckoning was useful and often uncertain. Dead reckoning meant estimating a ship's position from its course, speed, and time traveled. Navigators kept track of the direction of the ship, then guessed how far it had gone through the water. They used tools such as a log line and sandglass, but currents and wind could quietly push a vessel off its expected path. That uncertainty could grow day after day. Still, dead reckoning was essential. It gave sailors a working estimate of where they were, even when clouds hid the sun and stars. At sea, an imperfect calculation was often better than none at all. Now the horizon can grow soft again. The names, dates, And distant ports do not need to stay sharp. They can pass through your thoughts like clouds moving over moonlit water, present for a moment, then gone. Fact 10. Latitude was easier to measure than longitude. By observing the height of the sun at noon, or the position of familiar stars, sailors could estimate latitude, their distance north or south of the equator. Longitude, the east-west position, was much harder. It required knowing the time difference between a meridian and the place where the ship was sailing. Reliable marine clocks did not yet exist. This meant a crew might know roughly how far north or south it was, while remaining unsure how far east or west it had drifted. The problem shaped every long voyage. It made the sea feel wider, because a ship could be lost in only one dimension. There is something restful in knowing that no one on those ships could see the whole route at once. They traveled a little at a time. You can rest in the same way, without needing to see beyond this quiet moment. Fact 11. The astrolabe was an adapted tool of many cultures. The mariner's astrolabe helped sailors measure the angle of the sun or a star above the horizon. It was part of a much older family of astronomical instruments, developed and refined across Greek, Islamic, European, and other scholarly traditions. At sea, the metal instrument had to be simple and sturdy enough to use in wind. It did not solve every navigational problem, but it gave seafarers a way to turn the sky into numbers. Its history is a reminder that the age of discovery depended on knowledge inherited from many cultures, not only on ideas born in Western Europe. Let that image settle for a moment. There is no need to hold every name or date. Just picture the slow movement of a ship across dark water, guided by partial knowledge, and let the details drift onward like a wake fading behind it. Fact 12. The Atlantic required tad sailors to learn its wind systems. Early Portuguese voyages slowly revealed that the Atlantic had patterns. Trade winds, prevailing westerlies, and ocean's currents could help a ship or frustrate it. Sailors learned that the quickest route home was not always a straight line. Sometimes they had to sail far out into the ocean before turning back toward Europe. This looping strategy became known as the volta do mar, or turn of the sea. It was an elegant solution to a stubborn reality. On an ocean map, the route looked wasteful. In the moving air above the water, it was often the only sensible way home. For now, you do not have to solve the whole map. You can simply notice how one small decision, one instrument, or one turn in the wind could change the course of a journey. Then allow the sea to become quiet again. Fact 13. Cape Bogador became a psychological boundary. For years, Cape Bogador on the northwest coast of Africa carried a reputation for danger in European imagination. Stories warned of boiling seas, monstrous currents, and a point beyond which ships might not return. In the 15th century, Portuguese sailors gradually pushed beyond it. The achievement mattered not because the Cape was literally the end of the world, but because it broke a mental barrier. Once a feared limit had been crossed and mapped, the unknown moved farther away. Exploration often works like that. The horizon does not vanish. It simply shifts, quiet and patient, to a new place. It is a gentle reminder that history is rarely a straight line. It moves by detours, pauses, mistakes, and returns. As you listen, let your own thoughts take the easier route, drifting without needing to arrive anywhere at all. Fact 14. Atlantic islands became stepping stones and laboratories. Madeira, the Azores, the Canary Islands, Cape Verde, and other Atlantic islands became important stopping points in expanding ocean routes. They provided food, water, sheltered harbors, and places to repair ships. But they also became sites of settlement, plantation agriculture, and forced labor. Sugar cultivation on some islands helped develop systems, later imposed more widely in the Americas. This makes the islands more than peaceful dots on a map. They were early testing grounds for new forms of commerce, colonization, and control. A small island could become a hinge between continents, with consequences far larger than Ino's colon. You may imagine the sounds of ropes against wood and a soft, steady tide under the hull. The past can be complicated, but tonight we can approach it slowly, one calm detail at a time, without rushing toward the next horizon. Fact 15. African societies were active partners, rivals, and powers. European ships reaching African coasts did not arrive in an empty margin of the world. They met kingdoms, cities, merchant networks, and communities with their own political aims. African rulers and traders made choices about diplomacy and resistance. Some welcomed trade under carefully controlled conditions. Others fought, negotiated, or redirected it. European records often place their own captains at the center of the story, but the ships depended heavily on the knowledge and decisions of people already living along the coast. The coastline was not discovered. It was encountered, and the encounter was never one-sided. If your mind begins to wander, it can wander safely. These old routes crossed oceans, but you only need to travel as far as the next quiet sentence. Let the rest of the day fall farther behind you, with every imagined wave. Fact 16. The gold trade helped drive Portuguese expansion. Gold from West Africa had long moved through trans-Saharan and regional trade networks. Portuguese merchants hoped to access some of that wealth by sea. Gold mattered to rulers because it could finance armies, diplomacy, coinage, and further voyages. But commercial goals were tangled with religious ambition and political competition. A ship seeking gold was also a floating statement of power. It announced that a distant crown was trying to reach markets once connected by other routes. The age was not powered by curiosity alone. It was also powered by the hard pull of money and state ambition. A fact like this can feel large when we first meet it. Then, with a little time, it becomes one more light on a distant shore. You do not need to keep it. You can let it glow for a moment and then gently fade. Fact 17. Elmina showed how trade and fortification could merge. In 1482, the Portuguese built São Jorge da Mina, often called Elmina Castle, on the coast of present-day Ghana. It was a trading fort, but its walls also showed how commerce could be backed by force. Gold was central at first, and later the Atlantic slave trade became tragically connected to the site. Forts like Elmina were not simply warehouses. They were tools for controlling access, protecting commercial interests, and projecting European military power. Their stone walls still remind us that trade routes can never be separated completely from the question of who had the power to set the terms. The ocean often made people patient because it offered no faster answer. There was only the wind, the waiting, and the next observation. Let that patience belong to you for a little while, as your breathing becomes slower and softer. Fact 18. Bartolomeu Dias rounded southern Africa. In 1488, Bartolomeu Dias rounded the southern tip of Africa, proving that the Atlantic and Indian Oceans could be joined by sea. The Cape was first called the Cape of Storms, a name that captured the terrifying weather sailors could face there. Portugal's king later favoured the more hopeful name, the Cape of Good Hope. The change of name tells a story. A stormy place became a promise of access to Asia, but the route remained difficult. Geography had opened a door, yet every crew still had to push through wind, cold water, and the long curve of the African coast. Perhaps that is enough to remember. Every journey depended on people noticing the world around them. Tonight, you can do the opposite. You can stop noticing the small worries of the day and let them recede into the background. Fact 19. Vasco da Gama reached India by sea in 1498. Vasco da Gama's expedition left Portugal in 1497 and reached the Indian city of Calicut in 1498. The voyage connected Europe to the Indian Ocean by a direct ocean route around Africa. It was a major event in European history, but Calicut itself was not waiting to be discovered. It was already a busy port in a sophisticated trading world. Merchants from many regions came there, and local rulers understood the value of commerce. Da Gama's arrival was important because it added a powerful new player to an existing network, not because it began the network. Now the horizon can grow soft again. The names, dates, and distant ports do not need to stay sharp. They can pass through your thoughts like clouds moving over moonlit water, present for a moment, then gone. Fact 20. Calicut was already a meeting place of the Indian Ocean. When Portuguese sailors arrived at Calicut, they entered a marketplace shaped by centuries of exchange. Arab, Persian, Indian, African, Southeast Asian, and Chinese connections had helped make the Indian Ocean a commercial world long before Europeans came by the Cape route. Languages, religions, and trading, customs, moved through ports with the monsoon winds. This history matters because it changes the picture of discovery. European ships did not reveal Asia to itself. They arrived at places that already understood the sea very well. In many cases, the visitors were the least experienced people in the harbour. There is something restful in knowing that no one on those ships could see the whole route at once. They travelled a little at a time. You can rest in the same way, without needing to see beyond this quiet moment. Fact 21. Local pilots and interpreters made ocean crossings possible. European captains did not navigate every part of the world alone. They often relied on local pilots, interpreters, merchants, and guides. In the Indian Ocean, sailors who knew seasonal winds, coastal landmarks, port customs could be more valuable than any chart brought from Lisbon. Interpreters also mattered because a voyage could fail through misunderstanding as easily as through bad weather. The quiet figures who translated words, prices, and intentions were part of the machinery of global contact. History remembers captains by name. It often forgets the people who made their arrival understandable. Let that image settle for a moment. There is no need to hold every name or date. Just picture the slow movement of a ship across dark water, guided by partial knowledge, and let the details drift onward like a wake fading behind it. Fact 22. The Portuguese built a network rather than one continuous empire. Portugal did not control every coastline it visited. Instead, it developed a scattered network of forts, ports, and trading posts. Places such as Goa, Malacca, Hormuz, and later Macau became nodes in a far-reaching system. This kind of empire depended on ships, cannon, alliances, local intermediaries, and the ability to move information across long distances. It was powerful, but it was also fragile. A fort could command a harbor while remaining dependent on nearby food, water, labor, and diplomacy. The sea connected these outposts, but it also made them feel isolated when the next relief ship was late. For now, you do not have to solve the whole map. You can simply notice how one small decision, one instrument or one turn in the wind, could change the course of a journey. Then allow the sea to become quiet again. Fact 23. Goa became a major Portuguese base in Asia. In 1510, Portuguese forces seized Goa on India's west coast. The city became a central base for the Portuguese Estado da India, the network of territories and trading trysts that stretched across the Indian Ocean. Goa was not simply a European settlement planted on blank ground. It was a living Indian city and port whose people, labor, food, and surroundings made the colonial presence possible. Over time, the city became a place where languages, architectural forms, religious traditions, and commercial interests met. Its history holds both exchange and coercion in the same crowded streets. It is a gentle reminder that history is rarely a straight line. It moves by detours, pauses, mistakes, and returns. As you listen, let your own thoughts take the easier route, drifting without needing to arrive anywhere at all. Fact 24. The Carter system tried to regulate sea trade by force. Portuguese used a pass system called the cartas to control shipping in parts of the Indian Ocean. Merchants could be required to carry Portuguese-issued documents, and ships without them risked attack or seizure. This was an attempt to turn naval power into commercial power. It shows that the age of discovery was not only about finding routes. It was also about claiming the right to regulate routes other people had used for generations. The sea may look open from shore, but governments have often tried to divide it with paper, guns, and demands for tribute. You may imagine the sound of ropes against wood and a soft, steady tide under the hull. The past can be complicated, but tonight we can approach it slowly, one calm detail at a time, without rushing toward the next horizon. Fact 25. Malacca mattered because it linked many worlds. The port of Malacca stood near the narrow strait, connecting the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. Its location made it a key meeting place for traders from across Asia. When the Portuguese captured Malacca in 1511, they gained access to a vital point in the spice trade, but they did not simply take over an empty gateway. They entered a diverse city tied to Malay, Chinese, Indian, Arab, and Southeast Asian networks. Control of a strategic port could bring wealth, but it also brought rivalry. Every empire wanted the harbor. Every harbor had people whose lives were changed by that desire. If your mind begins to wander, it can wander safely. These old routes crossed oceans, but you only need to travel as far as the next quiet sentence. Let the rest of the day fall farther behind you with every imagined wave. Fact 26. Macau became a bridge between China and Portuguese trade. In the 16th century, Macau developed as an important Portuguese trading settlement on the coast of China. It connected routes linking China, Japan, India, Southeast Asia, and Europe. Trade moved more than goods. It carried artistic styles, religious ideas, technical knowledge, and new words. Chinese ceramics made for export reached distant households, while silver from the Americas circulated into Asian markets. Macau's story reminds us that early globalization was not a simple European story. It was made through negotiations with Chinese authorities, work by Asian merchants, and demand created across many regions. A fact like this can feel large when we first meet it. Then, with a little time, it becomes one more light on a distant shore. You do not need to keep it. You can let it glow for a moment and then gently fade. Fact 27. Columbus sailed west because he believed Asia was reachable. Christopher Columbus did not set out to find an unknown continent. He hoped to reach Asia by sailing west, across the Atlantic. He accepted that the earth was round, as many educated Europeans did. But he badly underestimated the distance between Europe and Asia. His calculation made a westward route seem possible. On the 12th of October 1492, his expedition reached an island in the Bahamas. He believed he had arrived near Asia and continued to interpret what he saw through that expectation. His voyage changed history, but its original plan rested on a serious miscalculation. The ocean often made people patient because it offered no faster answer. There was only the wind, the waiting, and the next observation. Let that patience belong to you for a little while, as your breathing becomes slower and softer. Fact 28. Columbus's first fleet was very small. Columbus crossed the Atlantic in 1492 with 3 ships: the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. They were not grand floating cities. They were small wooden vessels. carrying men, provisions, animals, weapons, and hopes that had been packed into tight spaces. The crews faced uncertainty that is difficult to feel from a modern map. No radio could call for help. No engine could push them through a calm. If sails failed or water spoiled, there was no easy rescue. The fact that 3 modest ships could begin such vast consequences is one of history's quieter shocks. Perhaps that is enough to remember. Every journey depended on people noticing the world around them. Tonight, you can do the opposite. You can stop noticing the small worries of the day and let them recede into the background. Fact 29. The Caribbean was already home to many peoples. When Columbus arrived in the Caribbean, he encountered Taino communities and other indigenous peoples, whose societies had long histories of farming, trade, navigation, art, spirituality, and political organization. The islands were not empty, and their people were not background characters in a European adventure. They had their own names for places, their own networks of exchange, and their own ways of understanding the sea. A calm history of the age of discovery has to begin here. The European voyage was an arrival in someone else's homeland, not the opening of an unused stage. Now the horizon can grow soft again. The names, dates, and distant ports do not need to stay sharp. They can pass through your thoughts like clouds moving over moonlit water. Present for a moment, then gone. Fact 30. Columbus never understood that he had reached another continent. Columbus made several voyages across the Atlantic, but he continued to believe that the lands he encountered were connected to Asia. He never fully accepted that he had reached a continent unknown to Europeans at this time. This mistake shaped the language of the period. People were called Indians because Europeans believed they had arrived in the Indies. The name survived despite the error behind it. It is a reminder that the first explanations people give for unfamiliar places can be stubborn. A map may change faster than a word does. There is something restful in knowing that no one on those ships could see the whole route at once. They traveled a little at a time. You can rest in the same way, without needing to see beyond this quiet moment. Fact 31. The word discovery can hide the people already there. The word discovery often tells the story from the point of view of the visitor. A sailor discovers land because it is new to him. But the land may have homes, histories, languages, and sacred meanings that stretch back for centuries. For this reason, many historians prefer more exact language: arrival, encounter, invasion, or colonization, depending on what happened. The words are not merely polite adjustments. They change what we notice. They make room for the people who had been living along those coasts before a foreign flag appeared over the water. Let that image settle for a moment. There is no need to hold every name or date. Just picture the slow movement of a ship across dark water, guided by partial knowledge, and let the details drift onward like a wake fading behind it. Fact 32. The Treaty of Tordesillas tried to divide oceans on paper. In 1494, Spain and Portugal agreed to the Treaty of Tordesillas, which drew an imaginary north-south line through the Atlantic. Lands west of the line were assigned mainly to Spain, while lands east of it were assigned mainly to Portugal. The treaty was extraordinary in its ambition. Two European kingdoms attempted to divide parts of the world they had not seen and could not accurately measure. Other powers did not accept the arrangement, and people already living in the divided regions had not been consulted. The treaty shows how boldly maps can be used to turn distant places into claims. For now, you do not have to solve the whole map. You can simply notice how one small decision, one small instrument, or one turn in the wind could change the course of a journey. Then allow the sea to become quiet again. Fact 33. Brazil entered Portugal's Atlantic world in 1500. In 1500, Pedro Álvares Cabral's fleet reached the coast of what is now Brazil while sailing toward India. The Portuguese claim over Brazil later rested partly on the line established in the Treaty of Tordesillas. But the coast was already inhabited by many indigenous peoples, including Tupi-speaking communities, among others. Portuguese settlement, extraction, mission activity, and plantation agriculture brought enormous change, conflict, and disease. Brazil became one of the largest and most consequential empires of the Portuguese Empire. Its story cannot be reduced to a detour made by a fleet. It became a transformation of lives and landscapes. It is a gentle reminder that history is rarely a straight line. It moves by detours, pauses, mistakes, and returns. As you listen, let your own thoughts take the easier route, drifting without needing to arrive anywhere at all. Fact 34. Amerigo Vespucci helped persuade Europeans that a new continent existed. Letters associated with Amerigo Vespucci described lands across the Atlantic as a new part of the world, rather than the edge of Asia. The details and authorship of some texts have been debated, but the idea spread quickly. European mapmakers began to imagine the western lands as a separate continent. In 1507, a mapmaker used the name America in honor of Vespucci. Columbus became the most famous voyager of 1492. Yet the continent was named after someone else. History has a way of distributing memory unevenly, with maps sometimes deciding which names last. You may imagine the sound of ropes against wood and a soft, steady tide under the hull. The past can be complicated, but tonight we can approach it slowly, one calm detail at a time, without rushing toward the next horizon. Fact 35. The Waldseemüller map changed the shape of the world on paper. The 1507 Waldseemüller world map is famous because it applied the name America to the newly understood western landmass. It did not show the whole truth. No map of the period could. But it marked a conceptual shift. The globe was no longer imagined only as Europe, Africa, Asia, and a few uncertain islands. A fourth great landmass seemed to stand across the Atlantic. Maps are often treated as records of knowledge. They are also machines for changing knowledge. Once an idea is printed, copied, and carried from city to city, it can settle into the imagination like a new coastline. If your mind begins to wander, it can wander safely. These old routes crossed oceans, but you only need to travel as far as the next quiet sentence. Let the rest of the day fall farther behind you with every imagined wave. Fact 36. Magellan's expedition sought spices, not a symbolic world tour. Ferdinand Magellan sailed for Spain in 1519 with 5 ships, hoping to find a western route to the Spice Islands. He was not planning a leisurely circle around the earth. He was pursuing a commercial and strategic goal in fierce competition with Portugal. The voyage passed along the coast of South America and eventually found a difficult channel at the continent's southern tip. The expedition then entered a vast ocean it had not expected to be so wide. The journey became a circumnavigation only because returning by the original route was impossible, and survival demanded another way home. A fact like this can feel large when we first meet it. Then, with a little time, it becomes one more light on a distant shore. You do not need to keep it. You can let it glow for a moment and then gently fade. Fact 37. The Strait of Magellan was a hard-earned passage. The passage, now called the Strait of Magellan, was narrow, cold, and difficult to navigate. It wound through channels at the southern edge of South America, where weather, currents, and unfamiliar shorelines tested the fleet. One ship deserted and returned to Spain. Another was lost. The returning vessels reached the ocean beyond, but the route was too challenging to become an easy highway for regular travel. Still, the strait mattered enormously. It proved that a sea passage existed between the Atlantic and the Pacific, and it gave mapmakers a new, cold, thin line to draw across the bottom of the world. The ocean often made people patient because it offered no faster answer. There was only the wind, the waiting, and the next observation. Let that patience belong to you for a little while, as your breathing becomes slower and softer. Fact 38. The Pacific received its European name during a moment of calm. After leaving the strait, Magellan called the ocean Pacific because its waters seemed calm at the beginning of the crossing. The name, meaning peaceful, was a fragile impression. The expedition endured hunger, sickness, and a crossing far longer than expected. The Pacific is the largest ocean on Earth, and the fleet's supplies grew desperately thin. The irony is gentle but sharp. A name born from a quiet first impression came to describe an ocean that nearly destroyed the people who gave it that name. At sea, the weather of one week can be a poor guide to the reality of a whole ocean. Perhaps that is enough to remember. Every journey depended on people noticing the world around them. Tonight, you can do the opposite. You can stop noticing the small worries of the day and let them recede into the background. Fact 39. Magellan died in the Philippines. Magellan did not complete the voyage that carries his name. In 1521, he was killed at the Battle of Mactan. He won a baby battle in the Philippines while taking part in a local conflict and attempting to support a ruler allied with Spain. The leader, Lapu-Lapu, and his community resisted the Spanish force. This moment matters because it interrupts the simple story of a European captain moving effortlessly across a blank map. The Philippines were not an empty station on a world tour. They were home to political communities with their own rivalries, leaders, and ability to resist outsiders. Now the horizon can grow soft again. The names, dates, and distant ports do not need to stay sharp. They can pass through your thoughts like clouds moving over moonlit water, present for a moment, then gone. Fact 40. Juan Sebastián Elcano brought one ship back to Spain. In 1522, the ship Victoria returned to Spain under the command of Juan Sebastián Elcano. It was the only vessel from the original fleet to complete the circumnavigation. Only a small number of the men who had set out were aboard. Their return demonstrated, in a grueling, practical way, that a ship could travel around the globe. But the achievement came with exhaustion, not loss and enormous human cost. The first circumnavigation was not a smooth triumph. It was a battered survival story that changed geography while leaving many people buried in distant places. There is something restful in knowing that no one on those ships could see the whole route at once. They traveled a little at a time. You can rest in the same way, without needing to see beyond this quiet moment. Fact 41. Pigafetta's journal preserved details of the voyage. Antonio Pigafetta, a member of Magellan's expedition, kept a journal that became one of the most important accounts of the circumnavigation. He recorded routes, observations, words from unfamiliar languages, and the strange experiences of a crew crossing unknown waters. Like all travel writing, his account reflected his own assumptions and the limits of his position. Yet without it, much of the voyage would be dimmer. A journal can be as important as a compass. It helps later generations understand not only where a ship went, but what its people believed they were seeing as they went there. Let that image settle for a moment. There is no need to hold every name or date. Just picture the slow movement of a ship across dark water, guided by partial knowledge, and let the details drift onward like a wake fading behind it. Fact 42. The first circumnavigation revealed how large the earth felt. People in educated circles already knew that the earth was spherical long before Magellan's voyage. What the expedition changed was the lived sense of scale. The world could be imagined as a globe, but sailing around it showed how enormous the distances really were. Food, water, weather, and time became part of the measurement. The globe on a scholar's desk could fit between two hands. The globe beneath a shiphead could consume years of a life. This difference between knowing something in theory and enduring it in practice is one of the oldest lessons of exploration. For now, you do not have to solve the whole map. You can simply notice how one small decision, one instrument, or one turn in the wind could change the course of a journey. Then, allow the sea to become quiet again. Fact 43. Manila became a crucial place across the Pacific. After Spain established Manila in 1571, the city became a major point linking Asia, the Americas, and Europe. It was built in a region already connected by Asian trade, and its growth depended on Filipino labor, Chinese merchants, Spanish colonial power, and the wider Pacific. Manila was not simply a Spanish outpost at the edge of a map. It became a crowded global city where goods, people, languages, and religions met. The early modern world was not made only in royal courts. It was also made in ports, warehouses, markets, and streets where strangers learned how to live beside one another. It is a gentle reminder that history is rarely a straight line. It moved by detours, pauses, mistakes, and returns. As you listen, let your own thoughts take the easier route, drifting without needing to arrive anywhere at all. Fact 44. The Manila galleons connected silver with Asian markets. From the 16th through early 19th centuries, Spanish galleons crossed between Manila and Acapulco. Silver, mined in the Americas, moved westward, while Chinese silk, porcelain, and other Asian goods moved eastward. The route tied together communities that had never met face to face. A piece of porcelain made in China could travel by ship to the Philippines, cross the Pacific, move overland in New Spain, and eventually reach Europe. This was early globalization in a physical form. It was slow, dangerous, and dependent on forced labor. But it connected distant economies in ways that reshaped and wealth. You may imagine the sound of ropes against wood and a soft, steady tide under the hull. The past can be complicated, but tonight we can approach it slowly, one calm detail at a time, without rushing toward the next horizon. Fact 45. Maps became tools of power as well as knowledge. A map could help a ship avoid a reef, but it could also help a ruler make a claim. European maps of the 16th century often displayed coats of arms, flags, ships, rulers, and imagined landscapes. They were not neutral windows onto the world. They were arguments. A painted emblem on a coastline could suggest that a distant king possessed the place. In reality, possession might be uncertain, contested, or resisted. The map made the claim look settled. This is why old maps are beautiful and unsettling. Their careful lines can hide the violent ambitions that asked those lines to become real. If your mind begins to wander, it can wander safely. These old routes crossed oceans, but you only need to travel as far as the next quiet sentence. Let the rest of the day fall farther behind you with every imagined wave. Fact 46. Mercator's map projection helped sailors while distorting the world. In 1569, Gerardus Mercator published a world map using a projection that made straight compass courses appear as straight lines. This was useful for navigation, and it became extremely influential. But every flat map distorts something, because the Earth is round. On Mercator's projection, areas near the poles appear much larger than they really are. The map was a brilliant tool, but not a perfect portrait. It teaches a quiet lesson about all maps. Usefulness and accuracy are not always the same thing. A map can be excellent for one purpose while quietly misleading us for another. A fact like this can feel large when we first meet it. Then, with a little time, it becomes one more light on a distant shore. You do not need to keep it. You can let it glow for a moment and then gently fade. Fact 47. Printed books spread new geography quickly. The printing press helped reports of voyages reach readers who would never stand on a ship. Travel narratives, maps, letters, and illustrated books could be copied in large numbers. Some accounts were careful, others were exaggerated, incomplete, or shaped to please patrons. But together they changed the public imagination. A merchant in a European city could learn of islands, animals, plants, and peoples far beyond the horizon. Printed geography made distant places feel closer, even when the information was. The world became larger in knowledge and smaller in imagination at same time. The ocean often made people patient because it offered no faster answer. There was only the wind, the waiting, and the next observation. Let that patience belong to you for a little while, as your breathing becomes slower and softer. Fact 48. Life aboard ship was crowded and repetitive. Long voyages were not made of constant adventure. Most days involved work. Sailors repaired ropes, adjusted sails, cleaned decks, watched the weather, pumped water, prepared food, and followed a strict rhythm of watches. Space was limited, sleep was broken, and privacy was almost impossible. The sea could be beautiful, but it could also be monotonous. A horizon looks peaceful when viewed for a minute. Viewed for weeks, it can become a test of patience. The age of discovery was built on the labor of ordinary seamen, whose names rarely appeared in the grand stories told afterward. Perhaps that is enough to remember. Every journey depended on people noticing the world around them. Ahmed, tonight you can do the opposite. You can stop noticing the small worries of the day and let them recede into the background. Fact 49. Ships carried food that could survive a long voyage. A ship needed provisions that would keep without spoiling quickly. Crews ate hard biscuit, salted meat, dried peas, grains, cheese, and whatever fresh food could be taken aboard at the last port. Water was stored in barrels, and its quality could decline during a long crossing. Rats, damp, mold, and insects made the task of feeding a crew even harder. Fresh fruits and vegetables were precious because they could prevent certain illnesses. Though sailors did not yet understand vitamins, the ship's pantry was a fragile system. A voyage might succeed or fail because of what happened inside a wooden barrel. Now the horizon can grow soft again. The names, dates, and distant ports do not need to stay sharp. They can pass through your thoughts like clouds moving over moonlit water, present for a moment, then gone. Fact 50. Scurvy made long ocean crossings dangerous. Scurvy was caused by a lack of vitamin C, though sailors of the age of discovery did not know the cause. Its symptoms could include weakness, swollen gums, bruising, and terrible exhaustion. Long voyages without fresh produce created ideal conditions for it. Crews sometimes saw the illness as a curse, or an unavoidable part of life at sea. Only much later did navies consistently understand the value of citrus and other fresh foods. Scurvy reminds us that a great global journey could be threatened by something very small. The absence of one nutrient in a diet of salt and ship biscuit. There is something restful in knowing that no one on those ships could see the whole route at once. They traveled a little at a time. You can rest in the same way without needing to see beyond this quiet moment. Fact 51. Weather could rewrite a voyage in a single night. Captains planned routes, but wind remained the final authority. A storm could tear sails, smash boats, snap masts, or drive a ship onto a coast it had tried to avoid. A calm could be just as frightening when water and food were low. Hurricanes in the Atlantic, monsoon changes in the Indian Ocean, and sudden squalls near coasts all shaped what was possible. Weather was not background scenery. It was an active force in politics, commerce, and survival. Sometimes, an empire's plans were reduced to the simple question of whether a wooden ship could stay afloat until morning. Let that image settle for a moment. There is no need to hold every name or date. Just picture the slow movement of a ship across dark water, guided by partial knowledge, and let the details drift onward like a wake fading behind it. Fact 52. Shipwrecks became part of the geography of empire. Many early modern voyages ended in wrecks. Some ships struck reefs, others were thrown ashore by storms, lost in fog, or broken by rotten timbers. Wrecks scattered cargo, people, weapons, and stories across coasts. They could become disasters for crews and unexpected events for nearby communities. Archaeologists now study wreck sites to learn about trade, shipbuilding, diets, and daily life. A shipwreck is a frozen moment of movement. It preserves what people carried across the sea, while also showing how little control they truly had over the water beneath them. For now, you do not have to solve the whole map. You can simply notice how one small decision, one instrument, or one turn in the wind could change the course of a journey. Then allow the sea to become quiet again. Fact 53. Disease traveled with people, animals, and cargo. Ocean routes moved diseases as well as goods. In the Americas, infections introduced by Europeans caused catastrophic losses among indigenous peoples who had no prior exposure to many of them. Disease worked alongside violence, forced labor, displacement, and disruption of food systems. It was not a simple or inevitable story, but it was devastating. The age of discovery is often illustrated with ships and maps. It should also be remembered through the invisible passengers carried in human bodies. A voyage could begin as a search for trade and become a public health catastrophe on another shore. It is a gentle reminder that history is rarely a straight line. It moves by detours, pauses, mistakes, and returns. As you listen, let your own thoughts take the easier route, drifting without needing to arrive anywhere at all. Fact 54. The Columbian Exchange changed diets around the world. After 1492, plants, animals, people, and diseases moved between the Americas and the rest of the world in what historians call the Columbian Exchange. Potatoes, tomatoes, maize, cacao, beans and chilies traveled outward from the Americas. Wheat, sugarcane, coffee, horses, cattle, and many other things traveled into the Americas. These changes reshaped farming and eating across continents. A familiar meal can carry the memory of an ocean crossing. Italian tomato sauce, Indian chilies, African maize dishes, and European potatoes all tell part of this long, complicated story of exchange. You may imagine the sound of ropes against wood and a soft, steady tide under the hull. The past can be complicated, but tonight we can approach it slowly, one calm detail at a time, without rushing toward the next horizon. Fact 55. Horses changed life for some indigenous peoples. Horses arrived in the Americas with Europeans and later spread far beyond the first colonial settlements. In some regions, indigenous communities adopted horses and transformed travel, hunting, trade, warfare, and social life. The process was not instant, and it was not the same everywhere. People made horses part of their own cultures in creative ways. This is an important reminder that indigenous peoples were not passive recipients of change. They adapted, resisted, exchanged knowledge, and shaped new worlds from the conditions forced upon them. A new animal became part of old and continuing human histories. If your mind begins to wander, it can wander safely. These old routes crossed oceans, but you only need to travel as far as the next quiet sentence. Let the rest of the day fall farther behind you with every imagined wave. Fact 56. Sugar connected pleasure with forced labor. Sugar became one of the most profitable commodities of the Atlantic world. It was also deeply tied to plantation systems that relied on the forced labor of enslaved Africans. The sweet crystals sold in European markets had histories of land seizure, brutal work, disease, and human suffering behind them. Sugar had been cultivated in many places before Atlantic expansion, but colonial plantations intensified production on a vast scale. This is one of the hardest truths of the age of discovery. Luxury for distant consumers was often built from the exhaustion and coercion of people whose lives were treated as expendable. A fact like this can feel large when we first meet it. Then, with a little time, it becomes one more light on a distant shore. You do not need to keep it. You can let it glow for a moment and then gently fade. Fact 57. The transatlantic slave trade was central, not incidental. The transatlantic slave trade forcibly transported millions of African people across several centuries over hated. And it was not a side story to exploration. It became central to the economies created by European expansion in the Americas. Enslaved people built cities, plantations, ports, and households. They also created families, faiths, music, knowledge, and forms of resistance under terrible conditions. The surviving databases, documents, and memories cannot make the scale feel fully human, but they help restore the reality that maps once ignored. Ships did not only carry explorers. Many carried people who had been violently taken from their homes. The ocean often made people patient because it offered no faster answer. There was only the wind, the waiting, and the next observation. Let that patience belong to you for a little while, as your breathing becomes slower and softer. Fact 58. African knowledge shaped Atlantic travel and trade. African rulers, merchants, sailors, translators, artisans, and communities shaped the Atlantic world in countless ways. Europeans depended on local knowledge of coasts, rivers, markets, and political conditions. African societies also made strategic choices, though those choices were constrained by growing violence and unequal power. It is tempting to tell the age of discovery as Europe going outward. A more accurate picture shows many worlds meeting, bargaining, fighting, and changing one another. The Atlantic did not become important because Europeans looked at it. It became important because people on all its shores were drawn into new, unequal connections. Perhaps that is enough to remember. Every journey depended on people noticing the world around them. Tonight, you can do the opposite. You can stop noticing the small worries of the day and let them recede into the background. Fact 59. Indian Ocean sailors understood monsoon winds. For centuries, sailors in the Indian Ocean had used the monsoon system to plan travel. Seasonal winds blew in predictable directions, allowing ships to cross between East Africa, Arabia, India, and Southeast Asia at different times of year. This knowledge supported and cultural exchange on a remarkable scale. European arrivals did not invent the rhythm of the monsoon. They learned to work within it, often with help from people who already knew it. The sea has its own calendar, written in wind. Skilled sailors learned to read that calendar long before European expansion reached the Indian Ocean. Now, the horizon can grow soft again. The names, dates, and distant ports do not need to stay sharp. They can pass through your thoughts like clouds moving over moonlit water, present for a moment, then gone. Fact 60. Arab and Persian maritime knowledge mattered deeply. Astronomy, mathematics, ship design, and navigation had been developed across many societies before the 15th century. Arabic and Persian scientific traditions, along with knowledge from South Asia, East Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Mediterranean, contributed to the tools and concepts later used in European navigation. The history of exploration is therefore also a history of translation and borrowing. An instrument may change shape, a calculation may change language, and a technique may move from one port to another. Knowledge travels like cargo. It can cross borders quietly, then appear later, as though it had always belonged to the place that used it last. There is something restful in knowing that no one on those ships could see the whole route at once. They traveled a little at a time. You can rest in the same way without needing to see beyond this quiet moment. Fact 61. Swahili coast cities were part of a vast commercial world. Along the East African coast, Swahili-speaking city-states such as Kilwa, Mombasa, and Malindi were connected to Indian Ocean trade. They exchanged African goods with merchants from Arabia, Persia, India, and beyond. Their stone architecture, coinage, languages, and religious life reflected both local roots and wide connections. When Portuguese fleets arrived, they encountered political communities already accustomed to maritime diplomacy and commerce. This matters because European sources often describe arrival as though they had opened closed doors. In truth, they entered rooms where conversation had been going on for centuries. Let that image settle for a moment. There is no need to hold every name or date. Just picture the slow movement of a ship across dark water, guided by partial knowledge, and let the details drift onward like a wake fading behind it. Fact 62. Zhenghe's voyages show another kind of oceanic power. In the early 15th century, the Ming Admiral Zhenghe led major Chinese voyages across the Indian Ocean. His fleets visited Southeast Asia, South Asia, Arabia, and East Africa. These expeditions happened before the famous Portuguese voyages around Africa. Their goals included diplomacy, trade, and the display of imperial authority. The comparison is useful, but it should not become a contest over who was first. It shows that the ocean was already a stage for large-scale state power. Different governments imagined the sea in different ways, and none of them began with an empty horizon. For now, you do not have to solve the whole map. You can simply notice how one small decision, one instrument, or one turn in the wind could change the course of a journey. Then allow the sea to become quiet again. Fact 63. Polynesian wayfinding crossed the Pacific without European instruments. Polynesian navigators crossed enormous distances in the Pacific, using expert knowledge of stars, swells, winds, clouds, birds, and marine life. They did not need European compasses or printed charts to find islands scattered across one of the largest ocean spaces. Their skill challenges the narrow idea that navigation means only metal tools and mathematical tables. Knowledge can be stored in memory, taught through practice, and carried in a crew's shared attention to the world around them. The Pacific was not a blank expanse waiting to be entered. It was a navigated homeland and a network of voyaging traditions. It is a gentle reminder that history is rarely a straight line. It moves by detours, pauses, mistakes, and returns. As you listen, let your own thoughts take the easier route, drifting without needing to arrive anywhere at all. Fact 64. Indigenous American boats were sophisticated technologies. Across the Americas, indigenous peoples built and used many kinds of watercraft. Canoes, bark vessels, dugouts, reed boats, and coastal craft designed for particular rivers, lakes, seas, and trade routes. These boats carried people, food, trade goods, and stories long before European ships appeared. In the Caribbean, coastal navigation linked islands. Along North and South American coasts, communities understood tides, fishing grounds, currents, and seasonal movement. A history centered only on tall-masted European ships misses a great deal. Maritime skill does not always look like a cannon ship or a royal fleet. You may imagine the sound of ropes get wood and a soft, steady tide under the hull. The past can be complicated, but tonight we can approach it slowly, one calm detail at a time. without rushing toward the next horizon. Fact 65. English, French, and Dutch voyages followed Portugal and Spain. Portugal and Spain dominated early routes, but other European powers soon entered the competition. English, French, and Dutch expeditions sought fishing grounds, trade, territories, and passages to Asia. Their goals overlapped and collided. A new map might invite another rival to send its own ships. The sea became a crowded field of claims, private ventures, and state-backed projects. No one European country held control for long. The age of discovery was also an age of competition, in which every return voyage could change what another government believed was possible. If your mind begins to wander, it can wander safely. These old routes crossed oceans, but you only need to travel as far as the next quiet sentence. Let the rest of the day fall farther behind you with every imagined wave. Fact 66. John Cabot's voyage reflected English hopes for a northern route. John Cabot, an Italian-born mariner sailing for England, reached the North Atlantic coast of North America in 1497. His voyage encouraged English interest in overseas expansion, though it did not immediately create a stable empire. Northern waters brought their own challenges: fog, cold, storms, and difficult coasts. The attraction was not only a hoped-for route to Asia. Rich fisheries, especially cod, became economically important. Fishing may sound less dramatic than conquest, but it drew ships and settlements across the Atlantic for generations. Commerce often begins not with a grand dream, but with a dependable source of food. A fact like this can feel large when we first meet it. Then, with a little time, it becomes one more light on a distant shore. You do not need to keep it. You can let it glow for a moment and then gently fade. Fact 67. Jacques Cartier explored the St. Lawrence River. In the 1530s, Jacques Cartier sailed for France and explored the Gulf of St. Lawrence and the river that would later become a major route into North America. He encountered indigenous peoples whose communities had long histories in the region. The river was not an empty corridor leading inward. It was part of established homelands and travel networks. Cartier's reports helped Europeans imagine the interior of the continent, but they also began a long history of French colonial interest. Rivers are often presented as routes on maps. For the people living beside them, they are also ancestors, workplaces, food sources, and homes. The ocean often made people patient because it offered no faster answer. There was only the wind, the waiting, and the next observation. Let that patience belong to you for a little while, as your breathing becomes slower and softer. Fact 68. The Dutch built a commercial empire on shipping and finance. By the 17th century, Dutch merchants and investors created powerful trading companies and shipping networks. The Dutch East India Company, founded in 1602, became one of the most influential chartered companies in history. It combined home commerce with military force and state-like powers. Dutch ships moved spices, textiles, ceramics, and other goods across oceans, while Dutch ports and financial institutions grew in importance. The Dutch example shows that exploration gradually became more organized and corporate. The lone captain did not disappear, but he increasingly operated within systems of investors, contracts, armed companies, and global markets. Perhaps that is enough to remember. Every journey depended on people noticing the world around them. Tonight, you can do the opposite. You can stop noticing the small worries of the day and let them recede into the background. Fact 69. The English East India Company blended trade with power. The English East India Company was founded in 1600 to trade in the East Indies. Over time, it became much more than a merchant enterprise. It gained military and political influences, especially in South Asia, and played a major role in the development of British imperial power. Voyages. The company's story shows how commerce can become government when a private organization receives extraordinary privileges. Ships carried cloth, tea, spices, silver, and letters. They also carried ambitions that would reshape the lives of millions. The age of discovery did not end when a route was found. It continued through the institutions built to exploit that route. Now the horizon can grow soft again. The names, dates, and distant ports do not need to stay sharp. They can pass through your thoughts like clouds moving over moonlit water, present for a moment, then gone. Fact 70. Privateers sailed in the grey zone between trade and war. Privateers were privately owned ships authorized by governments to attack enemy vessels during wartime. To their sponsors, they could be useful tools. To their victims, they looked very much like pirates. Figures such as our Francis Drake moved through this blurred world of state service, raiding, espionage, exploration, and personal enrichment. Privateering reveals how unstable ocean law could be. A flag might make violence legal for one country and criminal for another. The sea became a place where profit and warfare often traveled together, sharing the same sails and the same unpredictable weather. There is something restful in knowing that no one on those ships could see the whole route at once. They traveled a little at a time. You can rest in the same way without needing to see beyond this quiet moment. Fact 71. Silver linked the Americas to Europe and Asia. Silver, mined in the Americas, became one of the most important materials in early global trade. It moved through Spanish imperial systems, across the Atlantic to Europe, and across the Pacific through Manila. In China and other Asian markets, silver was especially valuable in monetary systems. The result was a web of exchange stretching across oceans. A miner in the Andes, a merchant in Manila, and a trader in China could be connected by the same piece of metal. This was global history before telegraphs or engines. It moved at the speed of wind, but it already tied distant labor and distant demand together. Let that image settle for a moment. There is no need to hold every name or date. Just picture the slow movement of a ship across dark water, guided by partial knowledge, and let the details drift onward like a wake fading behind it. Fact 72. Mining depended on harsh labor systems. The wealth taken from silver and gold mines did not appear by magic. It depended on labor, often coerced and dangerous. In Spanish America, indigenous communities were subjected to systems of tribute and forced work, while African enslaved labor also became part of colonial economies. Mines consumed lives, landscapes, forests, and water. The silver that glittered in royal treasuries began as rock broken in dark places. This is why material history matters. A coin or cup can look elegant in a museum case, but its story may begin with exhaustion far away from the people who admired its shine. For now, you do not have to solve the whole map. You can simply notice how one small decision, one instrument, or one turn in the wind could change the course of a journey. Then allow the sea to become quiet again. Fact 73. Colonial expansion changed forests, fields, and animals. European expansion altered environments as much as borders. Forests were cleared for plantations and settlements. New animals grazed on land that had never supported them. Crops were introduced. Soils were worked differently, and diseases affected both people and animals. These changes were not uniform, and nature did not simply obey human plans. Droughts, storms, pests, and local knowledge all shaped results. Still, the age of discovery began an era of ecological exchange on a remarkable scale. The movement of a seed or animal across an ocean could change a landscape as surely as the building of a fort. It is a gentle reminder that history is rarely a straight line. It moves by detours, pauses, mistakes, and returns. As you listen, let your own thoughts take the easier route, drifting without needing to arrive anywhere at all. Fact 74. Missionaries traveled with colonial expansion, but their encounters were complex. Christian missionaries traveled along many imperial routes. Spot. Some believed it deeply that they were bringing salvation. Others became involved in systems of conquest and control. In some places, missionaries learned local languages, produced dictionaries, and recorded traditions. In others, they helped suppress religious practices and reshape communities through coercion. When ousted, local people also interpreted, adapted, resisted, or combined new beliefs in their own ways. Religion in the age of discovery was never simply carried from one side of the sea to the other. It was argued over, translated, lived, and transformed in many different places. You may imagine the sound of ropes against wood and a soft, steady tide under the hull. The past can be complicated, but tonight we can approach it slowly, one calm detail at a time, without rushing toward the next horizon. Fact 75. Interpreters were essential to first contacts. When ships arrived in unfamiliar ports, interpreters could decide whether a meeting became trade, alliance, misunderstanding, or violence. Some interpreters had been taken from their homes. Others were merchants, travelers, diplomats, or people who learned languages through long experience. Their work was difficult because words carry more than definitions. They carry rank, courtesy, fear, and hidden expectation. A captain might say he wanted peace, while his weapons said something else. Interpreters stood in the space between those signals. They were often vulnerable, but they were essential. Without them, the first global conversations would have been even more confused. If your mind begins to wander, it can wander safely. These old routes crossed oceans, but you only need to travel as far as the next quiet sentence. Let the rest of the day fall farther behind you with every imagined wave. Fact 76. Women were present in the story, even when records overlook them. The popular image of exploration centers on male sailors, captains and kings. Yet, women were present throughout the age as rulers who funded policy, merchants who managed goods, indigenous leaders who negotiated or resisted, enslaved women whose labor sustained colonial economies, translators, settlers, healers, and keepers of households affected by long-distance trade. Their experiences differed enormously by place and status. Many records do not preserve their names. Still, the history of ocean expansion cannot be told truthfully without them. Voyages began and ended in societies, and women were central to the work of those societies. A fact like this can feel large when we first meet it. Then, with a little time, it becomes one more light on a distant shore. You do not need to keep it. You can let it glow for a moment, and then gently fade. Fact 77. Indigenous alliances shaped the course of conquest. European military technology mattered in colonial conquest, but it was rarely enough by itself. In many places, Europeans relied on indigenous allies who had their own political goals and rivalries. The fall of powerful states was often shaped by disease, local conflict, alliances, negotiation, and the disruption of existing systems. This does not lessen the violence of colonization. It makes the history more accurate. The story was not a small number of Europeans effortlessly defeating vast societies. It was a complicated and painful set of conflicts, in which many groups acted under changing pressures. The ocean often made people patient because it offered no faster answer. There was only the wind, the waiting, and the next observation. Let that patience belong to you for a little while, as your breathing becomes slower and softer. Fact 78. Resistance was constant, not exceptional. People affected by colonization resisted in many ways. They fought openly, fled, protected traditions, formed alliances, used legal systems, withheld labor, created new communities, and kept languages and memories alive. Enslaved people resisted through escape, rebellion, family bonds, religious practice, sabotage, and the daily refusal to accept that they were only property. Resistance did not always succeed in the moment, but it shaped what colonial systems could and could not do. A calm account should not make the past passive. Even under terrible pressure, people made choices, defended what they could, and carried parts of their worlds forward. Perhaps that is enough to remember. Every journey depended on people noticing the world around them. Tonight, you can do the opposite. You can stop noticing the small worries of the day and let them recede into the background. Fact 79. Natural history became another form of imperial collection, became ours. Explorers and colonists collected plants, animals, minerals, seeds, shells, and specimens from the places they reached. These objects were sent to European gardens, cabinets, universities, and royal collections. The collecting produced knowledge, but it also reflected unequal power. A plant might be removed from a community that already knew its uses and then renamed in a distant language. The age of discovery changed science by widening the range of things Europeans studied. It also raised questions that remain today. Who owns knowledge? Who receives credit? And what happens when living things are taken from their homes? Now, the horizon can grow soft again. The names, dates, and distant ports do not need to stay sharp. They can pass through your thoughts like clouds moving over moonlit water, present for a moment, then gone. Fact 80. Botanical gardens were connected to trade and empire. As new plants arrived in Europe and colonial settlements, botanical gardens became places to study, display, and sometimes test them. A garden could be peaceful, but it could also be part of a commercial system. Plants useful for food, medicine, dyes, timber, or profit were observed and moved from place to place. The calm rose of a garden may hide a long chain of transport, labor, and ecological change. In this way, the age of discovery entered everyday life. It could appear not only in a map or ship, but in a flower bed, a kitchen garden, or a cup of chocolate. There is something restful in knowing that no one on those ships could see the whole route at once. They traveled a little at a time. You can rest in the same way, without needing to see beyond this quiet moment. Fact 81. Chocolate, tobacco, and coffee changed habits across continents. Cacao and tobacco came from the Americas, while coffee had roots in Africa and Arabia before it became popular in Europe and the Atlantic world. These goods were not merely luxuries. They changed daily routines, social spaces, and economies. Coffee houses became a place of conversation and commerce. Tobacco became a major crop and trade item. Chocolate was transformed by sugar and new tastes. Each product carried stories of agriculture, labor, marketing, and colonial power. Something as ordinary as a drink or a leaf can be a small map of global history, carrying distant climates and distant labor into a familiar room. Let that image settle for a moment. There is no need to hold every name or date. Just picture the slow movement of a ship across dark water, guided by partial knowledge, and let the details drift onward like a wake fading behind it. Fact 82. Sea charts gradually became more precise. Early sea charts often focused on coastlines, ports, compass directions, and practical sailing information. They were not always accurate by modern standards, but they were precious working tools. As voyages increased, charts were corrected and expanded. New bays appeared, islands shifted position, and dangerous shoals were marked. Knowledge grew through repetition. A captain's observation might be copied into a chart, then revised by another navigator years later. This slow accumulation is one of the most restful ideas in the history of exploration. The map of the world was not revealed in one moment. It was adjusted, line by generations of watchful people. For now, you do not have to solve the whole map. You can simply notice how one small decision or one turn in the wind
Could change the course of a journey. Could change the course of a journey.
then allow the sea to become quiet again. Fact 83. Logs and letters made voyages into shared knowledge. A ship's log recorded courses, weather, sightings, and important events. Letters carried news of prices, discoveries, deaths, and opportunities. Together, these written records turned individual voyages into a wider body of knowledge. A captain might die at sea, but his route could survive in a notebook. A merchant in Lisbon or Seville could make decisions based on a letter written months earlier in a distant port. The age of discovery depended on the movement of paper as much as the movement of ships. Information was cargo too, and sometimes it was the most valuable thing in the hold. It is a gentle reminder that history is rarely a straight line. It moves by detours, pauses, mistakes, and returns. As you listen, let your own thoughts take the easier route, drifting without needing to arrive anywhere at all. Fact 84. Ports were where the global world became visible. Port cities gathered sailors, merchants, dock workers, soldiers, religious communities, enslaved people, travelers, and families waiting for news. They were places of noise, risk, opportunity, and uncertainty. Goods from many regions could lie side by side in warehouses. So could languages and customs. Ports were not calm in the ordinary sense, but they reveal a quiet pattern in history. The world becomes global not only through rulers and explorers, but through the daily work of loading, counting, repairing, cooking, bargaining, and waiting. Every ocean route eventually depended on a harbor and the people who kept it alive. You may imagine the sound of ropes against wood and a soft, steady tide under the hull. The past can be complicated, but tonight we can approach it slowly. One calm detail at a time, without rushing toward the next horizon. Fact 85. Seville and Lisbon became hubs of oceanic administration. Lisbon and Seville became important centers for organizing and profiting from overseas expansion. Officials tracked ships, cargoes, taxes, and permissions. Merchants sought information, insurance, and credit. Mapmakers and printers circulated new images of the world. These cities were connected to distant places through paperwork, as much as through ocean travel. A voyage might begin on a dock, but it was often planned in an office filled with contracts and lists. Empires required imagination, but they also required administration. The romance of the sea rested on ledgers, seals, warehouses, and people who knew how to count. If your mind begins to wander, it can wander safely. These old routes crossed oceans, but you only need to travel as far as the next quiet sentence. Let the rest of the day fall farther behind you with every imagined wave. Fact 86. The idea of a northwest passage kept pulling explorers north. European sailors repeatedly searched for a northern sea route from the Atlantic to Asia. Newer treats. The imagined northwest passage promised a shortcut that would avoid rival-controlled waters. Instead, explorers found ice, cold, complex coastlines, and immense distances. The dream lasted for centuries because the reward seemed so great. A single passage could reshape trade, yet the Arctic resisted easy use. The history of the search shows how maps can create longing. A blank space with the words possible passage can send people toward danger for generations. A fact like this can feel large when we first meet it. Then, with a little time, it becomes one more light on a distant shore. You do not need to keep it. You can let it glow for a moment and then gently fade. Fact 87. Whaling and fishing created their own ocean frontiers. Not every voyage was sponsored by kings or designed to claim territory. Fishing crews and whalers traveled far in search of valuable resources. Cod fisheries in the North Atlantic drew ships for generations. Whaling eventually carried crews into dangerous waters around the world. These industries were built on knowledge of seasons, animal movements, weather, and preservation. They also changed marine environments through intensive extraction. The age of discovery was not only about heroic captains reaching new lands. It was also about workers following fish, oil, and profit across seas that could be generous one year and empty the next. The ocean often made people patient because it offered no faster answer. There was only the wind, the waiting, and the next observation. Let that patience belong to you for a little while as your breathing becomes slower and softer. Fact 88. European powers competed through forts and factories. A factory in early modern language was a trading post, not an industrial building. European powers built factories and forts near important ports to store goods, house agents, and protect commercial interests. These places could begin as small compounds, then grow into centers of political influence. Their history shows how trade can become territorial control. A warehouse needs guards. Guards need supplies. Supplies need agreements or force. Over time, a commercial foothold can become an empire. The transformation was not inevitable, but it happened often enough to shape the early modern world. Perhaps that is enough to remember. Every journey depended on people noticing the world around them. Tonight, you can do the opposite. You can stop noticing the small worries of the day and let them recede into the background. Fact 89. The word empire covered many different realities. An empire might consist of conquered land, scattered ports, trading privileges, military alliances, colonies of settlers, or a combination of all of these. Portugal, Spain, the Netherlands, England, France, and others built different kinds of overseas power. None of them was simple. Some controlled vast territories. Others controlled strategic sea lanes or commercial nodes. Local communities did not experience these systems in the same way. One port might see new trade opportunities while another faced warfare or enslavement. The word empire is useful, but it can flatten the lived differences of people who stood on very different sides of the same map. Now the horizon can grow soft again. Now The names, dates, and distant ports do not need to stay sharp. They can pass through your thoughts like clouds moving over moonlit water, present for a moment, then gone. Fact 90. The Age of Discovery helped create new mixed cultures. As people moved across oceans, new communities, languages blended, foods mixed, religious practices changed. Families crossed cultural boundaries under conditions ranging from voluntary exchange to coercion and violence. In the Americas, Africa, Asia, and island worlds, people created new identities that could not be reduced to one origin. This was not a gentle or equal process, but it was real. Culture does not stand still when roots open. It adapts, preserves, borrows, and invents. The result is one reason the age still feels close to us. Many modern societies carry its complicated mixtures in their everyday words, meals, and customs. There is something restful in knowing that no one on those ships could see the whole route at once. They traveled a little at a time. You can rest in the same way without needing to see beyond this quiet moment. Fact 91. Ocean travel changed how people imagined time. A long voyage separated departure from arrival by months or years. News traveled slowly. A letter might arrive after the person who wrote it had died. Markets changed before ships reached port. Families waited without knowing whether a vessel had sunk or simply been delayed. This slow rhythm shaped emotional life, as well as commerce. Today, distance can feel almost weightless when messages travel instantly. In the age of discovery, distance had a physical weight. It was measured in tides, rations, and seasons. The sea made the world connected, but it also made waiting a central part of human experience. Let that image settle for a moment. There is no need to hold every name or date. Just picture the slow movement of a ship across dark water, guided by partial knowledge, and let the details drift onward like a wake fading behind it. Fact 92. Longitude remained a challenge until much later. The problem of finding longitude at sea continued long after the first famous voyages. Accurate longitude required precise timekeeping, because the difference between local noon and the time at a known reference point could reveal east-west position. In the 18th century, improved marine chronometers finally offered a practical solution. This later achievement reminds us that the age of discovery was not a finished technical revolution. It was a long process. Even after continents had been connected by sea routes, sailors could still be uncertain of their exact place on the ocean. For now, you do not have to solve the whole map. You can simply notice how one small decision, one instrument, or one turn in the wind could change the course of a journey. Then allow the sea to become quiet again. Fact 93. European expansion changed the language of the world. Place names, labels, and categories spread through maps and documents as European empires expanded. Some names replaced older ones, others existed alongside them. The words used by outsiders often ignored local languages or grouped many peoples into broad categories. Naming is powerful because it can shape what later generations believe. A name on a map can make a claim feel natural. Yet older names and languages survived, sometimes quietly, sometimes openly, carrying other ways of seeing the same place. The history of discovery is therefore also a history of naming, forgetting, and remembering. It is a gentle reminder that history is rarely a straight line. It moves by detours, pauses, mistakes, and returns. As you listen, let your own thoughts take the easier route, drifting without needing to arrive anywhere at all. Fact 94. Museums preserve objects from this era but also raise questions. Museums hold maps, astrolabes, ship models, textiles, ceramics, weapons, and objects carried across early modern routes. These collections can teach us a great deal. At the same time, they raise difficult questions about how objects were acquired, who made them, and whether they should remain far from the communities connected to them. The age of discovery is not only in old books. It is present in living debates about heritage and justice. A quiet object behind glass can contain a crowded history of trade, skill, loss, and power. You may imagine the sound of ropes against wood and a soft, steady tide under the hull. The past can be complicated, but tonight we can approach it slowly, one calm detail at a time, without rushing toward the next horizon. Fact 90. Fact: the term Age of Discovery is still debated. Some historians use the term because it is familiar and helps describe a period of European maritime expansion. Others avoid it because it places Europeans at the center and obscures the people whose lands and seas were entered. Both concerns are understandable. The best approach is often to use the term carefully while explaining its limits. Words are tools. We do not have to throw them away, but we should know what they leave out. A history that sleeps gently should still wake up to the fact that language can carry old assumptions forward. If your mind begins to wander, it can wander safely. These old routes crossed oceans, but you only need to travel as far as the next quiet sentence. Let the rest of the day fall farther behind you with every imagined wave. Fact 96. The age of discovery had no single ending. There is no exact day when the age of discovery stopped. Some histories end it in the 17th century, when earlier exploration gave way to established colonial systems and commercial empires. Others extend it into later centuries of scientific expeditions, Pacific voyages, and imperial expansion. The lack of a neat ending makes sense. Historical periods are not boxes with hard edges. They are patterns that gradually change. The same ocean routes that began with uncertainty became regular, then industrial, then modern. The horizon stayed the same, but the ships and the systems behind them kept changing. A fact like this can feel large when we first meet it. Then, with a little time, it becomes one more light on a distant shore. You do not need to keep it. You can let it glow for a moment and then gently fade. Fact 97. The sea connected wonder with consequence. It is easy to feel wonder at the courage, skill, and endurance of people who crossed immense distances in wooden ships. That wonder is real. It should sit beside another truth. Those voyages also brought conquest, disease, enslavement, environmental change, and the loss of many lives. Holding both truths together is not a contradiction. It is history. The age of discovery was full of human curiosity, but curiosity was often harnessed to power. When we look at an old ship on a dark ocean, we can see both the bravery of the crew and the larger forces that followed in its wake. The ocean often made people patient because it offered no faster answer. There was only the wind, the waiting, and the next observation. Let that patience belong to you for a little while, as your breathing becomes slower and softer. Fact 98. The story belongs to more than the famous explorers. The names most often remembered are Columbus, da Gama, Magellan, Cabot, Drake, and a few others. Yet the age was shaped by countless people whose names were not preserved. Sailors, cooks, shipwrights, pilots, translators, farmers, port workers, traders, enslaved people, indigenous leaders, healers, and families. Their work made movement possible. Their choices shaped what happened when ships arrived. History can seem quieter when it moves away from famous names, but it becomes fuller. The sea carried individuals who were not in the portraits, and their lives are part of every route on the map. Perhaps that is enough to remember. Every journey depended on people noticing the world around them. Tonight, you can do the opposite. You can stop noticing the small worries of the day and let them recede into the background. Fact 99. A world map is a record of meetings, not just distances. When you look at a map today, it can feel settled. Continents have familiar outlines. Oceans have familiar names. But every line has a history. It may come from indigenous knowledge, a sailor's observation, a surveyor's measurement, a colonial claim, or a later correction. The world map is not simply a picture of land and water. It is a record of meetings between people, often unequal and sometimes violent. It also records curiosity, patience, and the stubborn human wish to understand what lies beyond the horizon. Now, the horizon can grow soft again. The names, dates, and distant ports do not need to stay sharp. They can pass through your thoughts like clouds, moving over moonlit water, present for a moment, then gone. Fact 100. The oldest lesson of the age may be humility. The people of the age of discovery learned again and again that the world was larger and more complex than they expected. A route could lead to another ocean. A port could reveal a trade system older than the visitor's kingdom. A coastline could belong to communities the map had not named. This is perhaps the most peaceful lesson to carry into sleep. Human beings can travel far, make bold plans, and still arrive in a world that is not theirs to define. The sea does not belong to one story. It holds many, moving together under the same stars. There is something restful in knowing that no one on those ships could see the whole route at once. They traveled a little at a time. You can rest in the same way, without needing to see beyond this quiet moment. And now, as our long voyage through the age of discovery comes quietly toward its close, the sea can grow still. We have crossed routes shaped by wind and calculation. We have stood in crowded ports where merchants, sailors, translators, and families waited for ships to arrive. We have watched small vessels carry enormous hopes, and we have remembered that the same routes also carried conquest, disease, enslavement, and deep loss. The age of discovery changed the world. It connected distant places more tightly than before, but it did not create the first connections. It entered older worlds of knowledge and trade. Whilst it added new routes, new empires, and new forms of power. It brought wonder and consequence together on the same tide. Perhaps the most peaceful thought to keep is this: no sailor could see the whole ocean at once. They moved by small measurements: a star, a current, a shift in the wind, a familiar bird above the water, and little by little the horizon changed. Tonight, you do not need to see the whole path either. You only need this one quiet moment. Let the maps fold themselves away. Let the old ships drift beyond the edge of thought. Let the ports grow dim, the voices soften, and the sea become a dark, gentle field beneath the stars. Thank you for listening to History to Fall Asleep. Sleep well, and good night.